So, okay, guys, so let's start. I will just make a brief introduction. Hey, hi. um, because normally everyone wanted to come to Düsseldorf. First, Svitlana was tested positive on COVID, so she can't travel right now. And then you maybe heard that the half of Germany was, or the railway system was down in the morning. So also Asia and Dariia, because you couldn't come to us, so we just decided very spontaneously to switch to Zoom. And for this reason, also Jarema is joining us today. He's part of Pre-Compassion Theater. And I think I would just leave the stage to you, and you will, and I think Asia will start.
Good. Thank you, Anya, for invitation, first of all, and thank you everyone who came today. Unfortunately, we cannot see all of you, but we know that you are there. And we are very sorry that we were not able to come because of this complete collapse and with the transportation and COVID and whatever. So my name is Asia Bazdyrieva. I'm an art historian, but in recent years I was mostly or gradually switching to environmental humanities. And I will briefly introduce all other participants who are with us today. So we have Svitlana Matviyenko. She's a professor of critical media analysis at School of Communication in Simon Fraser University in Canada, in Vancouver. We also have Dariia Kuzmych, who is an artist. And we also have Jarema Malashuk, who I'm happy that he was able to join so spontaneously. Jarema is an artist and filmmaker, and he works in collaboration with Roman Himei. And so all of us, we are all from Ukraine, and we were based in Ukraine or were in and out of Ukraine. And also when the war started, we found ourselves with different proximity to the war zone. But all of us in our respective practices, we work with words, we work with images. And of course, I think many of you, most of you followed the events as they unfolded since February. And there were many times where each of us, many other people were thinking about how do we even talk about this war? How do we represent it? What is the role of the image? What is the role of the word? What is the role of the narrative? And for people like us who work with words or images or both, this question was even more pressing because again, kind of the production of images or production of words under the martial law or in the war context is kind of a different type of a challenge. But what is also important is to understand that all of us are human beings. And so we had to deal with the reality of war and to talk and write about it and produce other type of mediated work while also dealing and coping with the war. And so here I want to elaborate a bit on the name of this event. It's called the Labor of Witnessing. So today we will be talking about, or we will together try to understand and articulate what this labor is. And this phrase, the labor of witnessing, kind of appeared or gradually emerged through conversations that I had with Svitlana. So when the war started, I was first in Kiev and then in Kremenchuk, but very close to the events and to the audiovisual reality of the war. Svitlana was in Kamenets-Podilsky, which is south of Ukraine, and both of us were writing nonstop. And especially at the beginning, I was writing daily. Svitlana was also writing daily, and we oftentimes called each other because apart from the words that we were kind of writing and putting out there for the general public, we were of course dealing with our respected environments, with the stress, and maybe later on with trauma, but also with shock and different practical aspects of the war. So we were talking about kind of in addition to the events of the unfolding war, and in addition to our own kind of day-to-day lives of living through the war, we were also immediately reflecting on the nature of the work that we were doing. Like, what does it mean to be a body or a subject of the war, while also kind of translating it into some kind of a format that is accessible by people out there, like outside of the war context. So this is what I want to have a conversation between all of us today, to think about this type of labor, to think of our respective experiences of someone, of an artist, of a scholar, of a body that is being that finds itself herself in the war, and kind of figures out the way to do this labor of bearing witness to the event. So maybe we will start with kind of brief round of comments on our own experiences of kind of finding ourselves in this scenario of the war, and figuring out what do we do, or like how do we respond based on our individual practices, or what was our initial response while situated in our respective practices to the war and to the labor that we were doing. Maybe we will start with Svitlana, and then we'll do a round, and then hopefully we'll be having a conversation, and hopefully also people in the audience will have some questions that they can ask a bit later, so then we can kind of weave it in the conversation.
Thanks very much, Asia, and thank you again for organizing this event. I think it's very important to actually speak about this practice. What I've noticed through all these years, that so many Ukrainian citizens are caught in this practice. Some of them almost unconsciously witnessing and this event, but many people changed their profession, changed everything they've been doing before, and reoriented themselves to collect accounts, to witness themselves. And it's in a certain way incredibly interesting how a huge part of our population is suddenly doing this labor. So it's not only about certain words or images that we will be talking today, right? So it's not about our artwork or thought work, which also happening a lot on a huge scale. I'm also interested in that other dimensions that I'm observing, right? So it's a kind of national witnessing, and this is also national labor. So we'll see if we can kind of maybe unpack and think together about this dimension, but I think it's quite interesting to explore and elaborate later, because now we've been doing this labor, but of course it's also very important to understand what exactly we are doing and why we are calling it labor, and what aspects of it is labor, what about this type of witnessing. And I could say, like, if I just throw into some almost like kind of certain theoretical observations about that, something I already mentioned, it's for this particular experience of being caught, of being situated in the context of war, right? So we have subjects, very different subjects, who are there and who are locked in this experience on different distances, right? So which is also very important, because some people are experiencing rocket strikes, other people experiencing sirens, and sirens themselves are quite interesting and sort of unifying experience, no matter where in Ukraine you are. And I also wrote a little bit about that and keep thinking about that experience when this sound of an air raid siren goes off. So it's basically you can imagine how many people immediately, viscerally responding to that. So in a certain way, it's like sort of almost a unifying event in this affect. We are all caught in this affect, and it's kind of, you could even think about certain dynamics or energy that it generates and how kind of what it does to this mass of people at the same time. So, and that is part of witnessing, right? So no matter whether and how this experience will be remembered, it registered by the bodies, right? So it registered viscerally, and it produces some kind of affective trace. So that one of the things, right? But also there are people who actually moved out of Ukraine and do not hear sirens directly. However, we always hear that people are still following the events through social media and even through the apps, the same apps that notify about sirens, right? So which we have this general app created by the government, which we all have on our phones. So I think, again, what this witnessing engages so many different regimes and so many different ways in which we are connected, united, and sharing certain affects, seeing something, passing some information, passing some affect, and sensing this war. And when we think about, again, such thing as labor, and of course, labor is a particular term, right? So, and in political economy, there are different ways of distinguishing between work and labor, etc. And this distinction is still quite, we could say, elusive. But at the same time, we could say that, and the way how Asia and I were thinking about this term is because of its particular kind of emphasis on something excessive, that's something about surplus, that's some kind of theft. So in classical political economy, it is about theft, right? So labor is about theft. Labor is when something is stolen from you. And here we could imagine all different types of thefts that when something is taken from us, and in the situation when we are performing this witnessing. And of course, here, I also think of the subjects, of many subjects who are located on the intersection of very different economies. So, of course, there is like this direct war economy, very complex term, and so many things attached to that. But also information economy and attention economy, and other different things. We write, we type, we watch, and we participate in different media regimes. We are open ourselves to these particular streams of very heavy content and very difficult information. And that's what also this witnessing is about. That subject of witnessing doesn't have a choice to easily sign off, right? So there is some kind of necessity for all of us to know what is happening at any cost. So as soon as Russian troops withdraw from Bucha, we need to watch the videos. As soon as they deoccupy certain new territories and new traces of genocide are uncovered. And I know many people can maybe decide not to do it, but there is something in many of us that, like, at least many people might talk to, and I believe people in the majority do watch all this material, that we have to know what happened. We have to know how exactly people were tortured. We need to know how those torture cameras looked like. We need to see those gold crowns taken from the teeth of people, right? So we need to see it. And it, as we know, this is a tremendous labor of seeing this and knowing this and sort of letting it all go through your mind, body, all this processing is extremely difficult, and that also constitutes this labor. Labor has to do something with you cannot easily sign off, right? So you are destined to labor in a certain way, right? So you're destined to witness, because it's also your sort of responsibility as a citizen to deal with this in the future, because what is coming might be much more difficult for us, all this forthcoming trauma post-war. This knowledge that we are generating now by this labor of witnessing, hopefully may somehow help us to better deal with this. Although it's not going to be easier, I'm saying better, not easier. So that at least a couple of thoughts that I would like to share from the beginning.
This is good, and I will later have remarks, because I think some of the theses that you just articulated are really can be really productive to elaborate on later. But maybe we can hear from Dariia or Jarema, because I think for me it was also interesting that both Dariia and Jarema work with images. And if we kind of go back to February, March, April, there was this kind of consensus between people that we will not take images, so not to provide data to kind of the Russian intelligence. So it was a really interesting situation where, for example, Svitlana and we worked with words. We translated everything that was sensed, witnessed, through, and we put it into words. And I'm interested to hear from Dariia and Jarema, from people who actually works with images, like how did they kind of translate it, or like what kind of challenges related to translation of that witnessing happened to them as kind of visual practitioners.
I can start. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, that's a tough question and situation, because I remember the very first days of war, I had no empathy to produce any kind of image by myself, because I was fulfilled with all those images of from the front line, and the only way I felt that I could take an image or a video is to go there and capture this actual situations, and any other reflection in this like in a way safe place on the Western Ukraine, I couldn't imagine to do something. And of course, yeah, there was even like a joke regarding is it a linguistic turn in Instagram, because like the whole Instagram, which is a platform for pictures, right, turned into text, the images of text, the screenshots, and maybe all of our phones, at least mine, is covered with these endless screenshots of texts mostly. And yeah, so at that moment I was thinking about this witnessing as well, and I also was sharing it with Roman, and for me it was interesting to find out this quality of this witnessing, because there are different somehow different qualities of how should we then understand what do we witness and how do we witness it, and how sometimes this witnessing can be then narrated or transformed by other people, or like speculate. There are like some speculations of this concept of witnessing. For instance, in our case, we decided to make a first video work after the war. It was shot in April, and the point of this was to somehow show to the people who maybe, I don't know, a lot of people who are mostly not from Ukraine, somehow how do we experience it and how do we deal with this witnessing. And the question was for us is what do we see? And if we see, for instance, that Russian soldier, and this is very important. Who is it on the picture? If it's an offender, that's a different kind of witnessing. If it's a human from, like, it's a citizen of Ukraine, it's a different kind of witnessing. And sometimes this idea of witnessing, of death, of war, of these horrifying things are put it into the one thing and delivered to the outer world, or outer world is perceiving it as if it's just like some horrible disaster which has which like frozen in you, and you don't have any sense. You don't go further. You don't want to investigate anything else except it. And in this sense, we did the work that in some way, not only in this direction, but this one of this direction that was like expressing these differences between the witnessing and the quality of it. Thanks.
Should I answer already? Okay. So in my case, I've been in Ukraine until beginning of February for a few months. So I'm usually traveling between Berlin, Vienna, and Kiev, and so I experienced the beginning of the war being in Vienna. And first impressions were from my closer people, from my mother, for example, and father, who already from the first day went to as a soldier in territorial defense. And so about the images, I felt like while seeing all this and experiencing, it is impossible to produce images. It is more important to actually, how Svitlana called it, you're like obliged, or so it's like your destiny right now to capture it all in your body and be a witness without producing any other content. And so it also felt, so I will tell now a little bit from the body perspective, because I was away from Ukraine at this point. I still had retraumatization because we had war already going, and since 2014, and this full-scale invasion, also I was also expecting it in some way. It was a totally shocking event, and in my case, it was a retraumatization of a road accident which I had a very long time ago, and the beginning of this war felt like a global accident where all people I know, as if they are my body, are affected. So I thought from the first point about this post-traumatic stress disorder, and from my experience, this bodily experience is like a broken time, and it erases all previous signs and images which can be somehow gathered. So it erases any visual or sign information. So first, what is happening in this traumatic event is like a break in different temporalities, and it means that it has no image yet.
This is a really great comment in terms of like the lack of imagery, just because the the language, both visual and spoken, is collapsing at this point, and it's really kind of almost not possible to produce any sort of a representation. But I want to kind of link all our comments and to go back to what Svitlana earlier said about the impossibility of signing off. And so what I find really interesting about kind of the situation that we found ourselves, or this war, that it's probably, or we can say that it is the first big war in Europe that is happening, or like where everybody, literally, like regardless of their like social status and whatever, but everyone has personalized gadget. And we live in a heavily mediated world. We produce images daily and we post them as stories on Instagram and other platforms, Facebook. So we are living in this heavily image dominated world. But when the war started, even though there was like everyone has a gadget, but there was this social consensus of not taking images. But at the same time, we were all linked to all these Telegram channels and other sources of information through which the influx of images was coming into our bodies. And I think it is interesting, the idea of like not being able to sign off is almost like closely linked to the idea of like how we use social media over the past years, where we also kind of already heavily attached to Facebooks and other platforms, which are really difficult to leave if we take this decision. So there's this aspect of how this kind of subjectivity is being kind of rendered through on one hand this kind of access to the world of images and production of images, but at the same time kind of the decision or impossibility to share these images. And in this regard, I wanted to mention our colleague Dariia Kuzmych, who wrote a few months ago when the war started. She wrote that imperialism operates through erasure. And it is kind of an interesting situation where, again, kind of all aspects of our, I don't want to say the word identity, but all other aspects of our life were suspended. And we kind of were caught in the situation where the only things that we could talk about were things related to war. And we felt the need to communicate the war that later changed. And here I want to kind of pass the mic to others to reflect on what was this drive to communicate. Because in my case, I realized that the first months I felt like a soldier. I wrote every day until I was exhausted in summer, and then for a number of reasons I became completely silent. But at the beginning I was just producing words nonstop, and I was trying, like I felt the need to kind of to name the things that are otherwise kind of unfamiliar for me, or maybe they're somewhat familiar, but I needed to kind of name them properly. And I remember that Svitlana, in her dispatch, she wrote that she is writing because this is how she can control reality or produce her narrative about reality. And we can, of course, talk about writing as some sort of a therapeutic practice and whatever, but we can also talk about writing, documenting, representing, producing the labor of witnessing and kind of like folding it into some sort of narrative, because we live in a heavily mediated world. And the sense is that, like, if you do not produce your words for this reality, then the message can be immediately very fast produced instead of you. Maybe we can continue from here, Svitlana.
So to respond to this Asia's intervention about different temporalities that we have observed through all this process of of the months of the war, during which labor witnessing is performed, I do want to recall my own experience, which is one case among many others. My witnessing mostly is articulated in the form of a diary. The diaries that I started before the full-scale invasion. I started it in January because I was observing this kind of active militarization and escalation, which worried me very much. And myself, unlike many others, I did not believe that the war, full-scale war, would erupt. I thought that it would be just quite insane militarization and escalation. And I was already very worried about that and wanted to document that experience. So I observed the everyday life in my little town, Kameniec-Podilsky, where I'm taking care of my parents who are ill. And the life there, the everyday life, has been changing. So that was one particular rhythm of expectation. And I'm very glad that I actually have records of all that experience, because waiting for war is something that also really needs our understanding, kind of processing. So what it is, how it happens, and how we gauge whether or not it would happen. It's interesting how now when I speak to people who I definitely remember thought that the war wouldn't happen, now say that they absolutely knew it would. And I'm also interested in how this memory is being reshaped, or certain, and sometimes it's conscious, and sometimes I think it's quite unconscious, right? So with everything we know and witness today, sometimes it's almost difficult to articulate or admit that somewhere in January, it was unbelievable, right? So all of it is with this memory, with all this fragility and the palimpsest characters that we are dealing with, and we are kind of seeing, experiencing, and our records of that would be quite an important kind of testimony of all these changes. And then, of course, the war or the full-scale invasion happened. And there was one amazing moment, actually, in the evening before it happened on February 23rd. Asa and I had a very long conversation on phone. We were planning our next year, and we wanted to work together. We designed an amazing project about ecology and Vernadsky and Ukrainian land and philosophy of bio and noosphere. And so we kind of put up like this whole plan, how it's going to happen, who goes where, when we do this and that, and etc. And we hanged up after midnight. And then at 5 in the morning, and I wake up very early, and I had Isa's text, and she was saying that the war began. And I started to calm her down, because I remember even from that previous conversations that she was kind of nervous about the future and other things. And I thought it's just a continuation of that, her mood and etc. And I said, don't worry, it's just training. And she's like, no, it's all over Ukraine, it began. And so that kind of like was total change. And next, the same, like in the evening of the same day, we again had a long conversation about everything. And it was so difficult to believe, like, what this kind of temporal fault between one evening and another evening. And Asa said that we are kind of like different people now. So it just some kind of absolute transformation happened. And after that, I completely agree with her. Happened work, and the work of these soldiers' witnesses, right? So when we had to document, it was very fast, and indeed I was trying to control reality. Also very interesting question, which we will now leave unanswered, about how and what platforms we chose to document this experience. So obviously Facebook is very popular in Ukraine, and Twitter to lesser extent. And those platforms were very much engaged in sort of, receiving all this witnessing accounts. Myself, I don't use this platform for political reasons, but I documented writing a word text, basically, right? So, but I was browsing, obviously, and doing another type of labor and collecting all this information and exposing myself to it and trying to synthesize it. And tell something to the world, because at that moment, of course, now just there is a lot of reporting, even though still quite dissatisfactory and upsetting. But at that moment, there was a sense that there were no war correspondents, not a sense, it was true, there were no war correspondents in the country. So in a certain way, for quite a while, all of us also became war correspondents, right? So it wasn't only about producing record and structural reality, but it's also about being war correspondents. For a couple of months, and I'm just finishing here, just to give a sense of kind of like different dynamics of all this experience, I was all engaged in the same pace of kind of writing and processing. Since my subject is cyberwar and disinformation, I always felt like as an analyst, I also have to tell something about it. And I had many requests for comments and etc., where I could provide some professional expertise. But there was something very kind of subjective for me, something beyond any expertise in that. In fact, I was an expert completely lost in all these information highways. And when I sensed that, it was very interesting for me. In fact, I wanted to kind of dwell on my experience of loss. So I thought I can say so much about political economy of media. I can say about so much about this and this, about cyberwar, about how it's done, about why, and this and that, about also the fossil fuel economy. But I wanted to dwell on this loss because I think it was also a very interesting and a really important experience to think about, because what that subject who was immersed, no matter how much of what the subject knows, what this experience of loss is maybe the most precious experience for me that I am taking away after all this years and days, months and days of analysis. In summer, writing about war became incredibly painful for me, and I produced only 2 dispatches because I published one of them and I get like a weekly depression. I published another one and there was another weekly depression. And I always felt ashamed that I feel this pain because I thought nobody among my relatives was killed. I don't even have any relative at war. Friends, right? Yes. And there were many losses among friends, obviously, but I don't have my kids at war, as many of my childhood friends now have their kids at war. And sometimes I think that my distance with this country, because I haven't lived in Ukraine for quite a while, equals the life of a young man or a woman who can now defend this country. And so that's where I came back, and those young people who are now 20-year-old actually go and defend us here. So that was all very difficult experience. And I thought I wouldn't be able to produce any more text because the depression was so deep and so kind of unbearable. And then I published the last dispatch, and I feel again so totally kind of disoriented, as even some flow washes everything off. And I don't even know how to kind of comprehend this experience. Maybe it's some kind of tiredness. Maybe it's that labor exhaustion. I don't even know. At this moment, I'm also trying to sort of record this and think that, but definitely there are very interesting, very complex dynamics in all this process, and I'm happy to hear from other people and think together about what it means and how it's done.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly comment also on what you just said, because it is always, and this is why we kind of centered the conversation around labor of witnessing, to always remember that there is a body that is producing that knowledge, because we all became like war reporters, but we are not some people who have critical distance to the subject of their reporting who came there. We are there. And I want to read a fragment from my diary, because my reporting was also in the shape of a diary. So this is from early April, where I write that all our conversations with Svitlana were eventually leading to what we call the labor of witnessing, which oftentimes is taken for granted and exhausting not only by the nature of the event that we endure, but also by inconsiderate requests or casual messages, many of which I just stopped responding. We say to each other, please take care, have some rest. And we believe we do so, but the war is here for long and forever, even when we have the moments of joy. And then Svitlana writes in her dispatches, this job, the labor of witnessing, this job demands a lot from you. It will take away your sleep, it will give you nightmares, it will make you cry, you will feel sick and nauseous and disgusted and furious and extremely, extremely helpless. And as Svitlana mentioned, and it was in my case too, that like the first months we were like soldiers producing words, but by the summertime it was already kind of very exhausting and difficult to write. And I recently read a text by Naoki Ngumi about the post-traumatic silence. And she writes about this asymmetry of this labor of witnessing in a way, because we kind of like, we do this work of communicating these events to this outside world, but we are also doing it, she writes, we are talking while mourning. So we are still kind of crying over the loss and over the dead bodies. But at the same time, we keep talking while managing our smiles, because we still have to like find this kind of way to talk out. And this here, I want to link back to what Dariia said earlier about the re-traumatization, because in her practice, she works with the questions of corporeal or embodied experience of trauma. And she, when the war started, she kind of like felt as this body that kind of has this imprint of collective trauma at the moment. And I think what is important is that it is not only about the personal experience or through how the personal experience is linked to other bodies, but it is also about the very continuous experience of imperialism. And in fact, kind of the current war of Russia on Ukraine, it's not an event. It's a very kind of, it's an actualization of a longer history of imperialism. And if we speak about Ukraine, about Ukrainian bodies and Ukrainian lands, they have been subjected to colonization that is coming both from East and West. And so kind of these lands and these bodies endure this very long process. And for us, for artists and scholars, like we have been over the past kind of decades trying to kind of be those bodies that piece back histories that were erased. We tried to kind of create knowledge about the space in various ways through like visual language or spoken language in various ways. But then with the coming war, it kind of erases or like produces more loss that is much more about the personal or embodied experience. It's kind of this kind of connected experience of erasure or loss of something that is profoundly kind of linked and much bigger than kind of a single body. And the body in a way becomes a landscape, which I think is very present in Jarema's work. Maybe Dariia or Jarema, maybe you have some comments.
I can continue. So about exhaustion, it's because we are speaking again about this corporeal experience. When the first weeks of the full-scale invasion were ongoing, I already felt that okay, now everybody I observe that people are very like when body needs to keep the battle to survive, it accumulates all the power which it has. And after first phases of survival, at some point the exhaustion will come. And I just because I knew it from the body experience, I expected it on the larger scale. And it was also interesting to observe how people who I know or follow, how their witnessing was changing through the time. For example, yes, the summer was the time when all the roles which were taken in the first months to to communicate this war into outside world. These roles at some point for somebody became not effective anymore, and because you are doing this work of showing, of communicating the war, you are somehow not allowed to skip it. Okay, we spoke about it already, and for example, for me, I was all the time in Austria because of one project in public space, and I couldn't. I wanted to go to Kiev and just to be here and feel how it is, but I couldn't do it because of the project, and maybe because of the danger. But I felt it more because of work, not because of a real danger. And when I came to Kiev, so it was for me actually first time since the first week of February. It was very strange experience to see that some areas in the city or spots seem like before. For example, cafes are open, or I don't know, the landscape, paysage allee. So I mean the city center spots, which are very loved by the people, they are just livable as it is, but only the sirens, when sirens are going on, then you remember actually what is happening. And it was in the first days very strange for me to experience, because I thought maybe I just came back in the time, so I didn't came to Kiev, which already went through this experience, and is actually going farther, but more in other regions. It just felt like maybe it was a mistake, maybe it was just a nightmare, and I see some peaceful parts of the city which are normal, and this comparison of what I was witnessing through distance, and when it came together in physical way, it was very disappointing experience. So it's like times mixed up, but actually everything goes farther. And about exhaustion, I also did a video work for one exhibition in which is based on my travel in August to Ukraine, to different places, to mostly northern parts of Ukraine, and the video work is also showing these layers of trauma which are inscribed in the land and the experiences of people. And for example, yes, so and also the how we observe the places which were not damaged by occupation. They seem like they seem more fragile and even more beautiful than you usually observe this landscape. For example, okay, here I accidentally switched the topic, but maybe we continue.
Yerema, you have some comments?
Yes, I would like to add like a bit of more of this experience of first days of war, and Svitlana mentioned that nobody was really expecting what will happen, and me as well in a way. And what was interesting for me, I think that when I woke up in the morning and I felt that I'm a completely different person, in some way that I woke up in this black and white world, in this situation when you you realize that you are in this, great history. You're in this great history with the great big events, and then all these endless images fall on me from this endless scrolls and texts, but there were too much of them. Like when you read about or look at some films or footages from Second World War, any other like previous century wars, you just have some of these, and now you're in this great history, not like great, but great in the sense of like during the big, and then you found yourself in this images, and these images doesn't really show you, they don't connect with this stories that are unfolding, with this war that is unfolding. They are like, some parts of like damages and dead people, and they are like the amount of them wasn't possible to somehow understand what is it all about. So that was my confusion in this sense. But at some point I realized after a few months, I was in a Western Ukraine, then I went a bit for abroad, and then I came back to Kiev, and I was sitting actually at the same chair where I'm right now after 1 week in Kiev, and my friend called me and said, because he was working as a fixer with some French TV crew, and he said like, hey, do you want to go and film a little bit at the front line? And for me, it was like I was as well with Alina Horova, it's a filmmaker for Ukraine, and she was doing a movie, and Pavlo Yurov was doing research for his theatrical piece, and he said like, do you want to film? And I felt that this is a chance for me to stop this endless scroll, to somehow interrupt it, and to see by my own eyes, to witness it not through the image but through my eyes, and to image it through the geography, through the land, through the landscape, and I'd say it's a bit different experience, because you realize that this everyday life is really close to this horror, and this is what you will never show in the image. It's impossible to show, I don't know, 12 hours of silence and 5 seconds of bombing. You cannot make a film for 12 hours and 5 seconds about this. You can only experience it, and for this sense, it was really important for me how I now understand and witness all this, and maybe I freed myself a bit from this confusion between this amount of endless amount of pictures and me being in this great history, I would say.
Yeah, this is important. And I remember like at the beginning when there was kind of endless scrolls of Telegram chats and information and updates about everything, and like lots of dead bodies in the chats. But then me, or like every person who was not in territorial defense or in critical infrastructures or at war, we were all reduced to like bomb shelters or like rooms where we would be like spending times between the bomb shelters. And I remember, like, of course, there was this urge to communicate things. And at some point, I think it was early March, like after the first 2 weeks when Western Europe was also very engaged into following the news. But then someone wrote here, I think it was someone here from Germany, wrote that like, I'm going to reduce the screen time. And then I responded that I am the screen in the meantime, because I felt like a screen, and I didn't have the luxury of just like not doing it, because I felt like I need to be that body, even if this is a body that sits in the bomb shelter and says, I'm alive, help, close the sky, NATO, whatever. But like, I felt like even, and this is why maybe I've chosen the format of diaries, because I know that at that moment, as a scholar, I was not able to produce any information. But as a subject or as a body, as a screen, I had to be out there to kind of to be that other kind of the testimony of something that was happening, even though it was not yet having any narrative, or were lost in between the narratives. And here I want to ask Svitlana maybe to talk more, because you wrote a lot, or it's your expertise to write about cyberwar. And I think what is really kind of particular to the current unfolding war, that it is also, and the fact that we cannot really call it war because it's something much bigger and more complex, and something that involves larger instruments on kind of twisting and folding the very tools that through which we make sense out of reality. Like, if we normally rely on certain words, narratives, kind of epistemological paradigms to make sense of it. And so the cyber war eventually kind of like twists everything that we normally use. And maybe in this regard, you could comment, like, what does it mean? Or like, what is this witnessing practice, which is not necessarily kind of, it might not necessarily be packaged as text or image or whatever, but us as bodies, as screens, versus this kind of epistemological twists that are happening. And in this regard, I wanted to also kind of add one comment, that the complexity of writing for me, and I know for Svitlana as well, we talked about it a lot, and for many other people in Ukraine, that at the beginning, as Yarema said, like, we woke up in this very black and white world. But then later on, we needed to find more complex kind of words and articulation. But I was finding myself on the flip side of Russian propaganda. Like, I felt like I had to write only things that kind of subvert what like Russians say, and it's very difficult to be reduced to that body that only speaks about the things that kind of proposed by the Russian side, that constantly tries to kind of like turned upside down kind of names and things and the ways we call things. So maybe Svitlana, you could comment on that, and then I think our time will be over in 10 minutes, and then we can reconnect and take questions from the audience.
Okay, yeah, there is a lot here in what you said, and it's all very complex. So I will pull just a couple of threads that I think I can develop. I hear very often now that some people resist calling what is going on war, that it seems something bigger. I do call it war. So this is war. And but of course, it's happening with some older and newer regimes at the same time. And it is precisely for the reasons that you mentioned, right? So that it has a new pace of immediacy as we never experienced before. And so that's why this war feels so much enlarged and augmented, right? So, and sort of with all, like, the witnessing of this war is because it's so rich and because it spread so much, so that we have this experience of overwhelming, something bigger. But this is war, and for me, it's quite important. I also want to say that this impression also is created, in my view, because of immense complexity of this war. And the way how I try to understand it is through seeing certain realms of vectors that either intersect or do not intersect in this war. And one of them is, of course, with this global dimension. And another is the dimension between these two countries, the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Colonial and imperial dimension, which is very real and very much present, and probably a core dimension of this war. But there is also this global dimension, right? So that we always hear from our left colleagues abroad, right? So it's all about imperial powers and etc. And I do see that it's also about imperial powers, because as a global event, it has to do with a certain redistribution of powers, economies, and etc. And so this dimension is present. However, I found quite interesting differences that operate on both in both realms. While we speak about this inter-imperial war, it is cyber war too, and it operates through what I call, not I call, but we recognize as a logic of deterrence, right? So all this pushing, escalation, nuclear blackmail, and all of it, right? So it's all kind of inherited from the Cold War dynamics. And it's very different from what is happening in that other realm, which is between Russia and Ukraine. And while there it is a deterrence, here we see terror. We see ongoing production of terror by all means. It's a war on that. So whether we have a genocidal sites, it's a genocidal matter itself is production of terror. So it's murder, first of all, but also it's production of terror when this information becomes content and is spread through the networks. So it's a kind of, there are certain loops, certain levels of multiple productions of terror, right? So physical, by physical killing, by physical humiliation, by deterioration and pollution of this land, by burning it out, by torturing people, etc., right? So all of it is a materiality of this war, is a texture, it's a mess, it's a bloody mess of this war, it's a bloody mess of violence, but at the same time, it also immediately becomes that content that is circulating. So we have levels and levels of production of terror. And it's very different, right? So deterrence is initially a type of negotiation. So inter-imperial powers, whatever is happening between them, they're friends. Everyone wants things to settle. Everyone wants the gas flow and etc. And then we have terror, which is not about negotiations. It's erasure. And so with these two dimensions, we have to realize that they are co-present here. And that's what creates a kind of horrible kind of like complexity of this war. And sometimes it's very difficult to understand it because many different parties like to emphasize either on one or another side, but they're happening in the same time. And for those negotiations to happen successfully, the terror and this erasure also has to happen even more successfully. So in a certain way, the worst which is happening here, it kind of serves that other purpose. And that's how I feel this huge kind of like conflict of these realms and a certain deadlock where this war entered.
While we're coming back, maybe if people in the audience have some comments and questions, that would be a good time to collect them and pass it on to us.
Yeah, I think we just continue with like a more open forum of conversation. So I have maybe a first question that is related to many things that you were saying today. And also maybe to ask you first, is when you write, do you have like a reader in mind? Because I think I could like feel that your audience has been changing over time. Also, like I think you moved from Kiev to Berlin, or you have been like changing places all the time. And if the one that you are addressing with it, because in the beginning we were also speaking, or you were speaking about that, like all Ukrainians of the nation is becoming like one body, and you like also write to or what Svitlana was saying, that you write to become like this, or have like the share this feelings, or share like emotions, but also like the things that you're witnessing. But the question is for sorry. So the question is for who is like the audience that you are addressing.
Yes, thank you, Anya. This is a very important question. Like the short answer, yes, that the audience eventually like had a huge impact, and I will elaborate. For those who don't know, like I was writing on Instagram, and the reason why I started the linguistic turn, like the reason why I started to write there was because like I didn't mean, I mean, first of all, the war starts, it's a shock, even though we, again, and Svitlana was right, like in our respective diaries, the war is happening much earlier, already like in November, December, I was already writing about it. But the reason why I made it public, and the reason why I made it public on Instagram, was because like I woke up because of the explosions, and I didn't know like what waits for me like in a couple of hours. Like I was in a dangerous situation. And I knew, because this is when there were lots of messages from people just like asking me like, how are you alive, etc. And I knew that I was not able to communicate properly with people because of the shock and adrenaline. So I decided that I write one message on Instagram that like, this is what's happening, I'm alive. And so it started as almost like a notification to my closed circle of people. But then it unfolded into like kind of bigger, because I had so much, like I felt like a soldier, like the words were just coming and coming and coming, shift after shift. I couldn't sleep, and I was just writing and writing and writing. And it was not my purpose, but very soon the audience of my Instagram, which was not big, it was like about 2,000-3,000 people initially, but it kind of like gradually went to like 10,000, 14,000, and so on. And the way it has influenced me is that I stopped writing. Like in May, I realized that I cannot do it in this format, just because I think, I mean, places like Instagram are designed for influencers and like people who kind of, this platform is designed for those who need the audience and whose purpose is the audience, and who need to produce or like meet certain expectations to satisfy that audience. And this was not me. Like I started it for different purposes. And I realized that Instagram is not designed for a humanities scholar. It's designed for someone who like kind of figures out how to sustain the audience, but it was not my interest. And also, I guess there was, of course, lots of messages that people were sending to me. And like some of the messages were like supporting, and this was important for me, of course, like from all over the world. But some people were attacking me. And like in April, there was lots of messages from Germany that was aggressive. Like people literally sent me voice messages saying that they're freezing in Germany because of Ukraine. And I remember how I was like shocked. And I talked to Svitlana about it, and she said that this is bullying, actually. So there was lots of this kind of like mixed feedback, one super amazing and supportive. Another feedback was just like kind of like attack on what I was saying. And I was not there to, you know, like to entertain the audience. And I didn't like that at some point there was this expectation of me being a witness. And oftentimes people completely had no like sympathy to me being a person in that conditions, like writing that I wasn't doing it because I was a blogger or whatever. So the impact was eventually that I realized that I cannot continue like this, among many other reasons. Yeah. Svitlana has different experience because she kind of not necessarily knows her audience, because on Instagram it's quite immediate, but Svitlana published her dispatches on a university blog, so she didn't meet her audience. But I don't know, do you feel any kind of impact on through what you wrote and how people received that?
Yeah, not much impact, because my diary, I was invited, I was in communication with Dutch media scholar Gert Lovink, and we were in touch a lot about what was going on in Ukraine. And right before the full-scale invasion, he asked me to, I mentioned to him that I'm writing about that. And he asked me to, if he could publish that diary in dispatches on the website of the Institute of Network Cultures in Amsterdam, that published in Amsterdam. And that's how that became a platform, right? So in some way, it was completely bottlenecked. So I only had messages from Geert that he would text me and say, like, many people read your diary. So, but what does many mean? I don't know. So people, but I could say that people from different countries definitely read the diary, because I got a number of requests for even documentary making and etc. on the basis of that record. Then sometimes I was quite curious how it actually went around. So so I didn't control my audience and didn't know my audience. I, in a certain way, I could assume who these people are. That's probably people interested in information technology politics, who are the audience of Institute of Networks, right, and Lovink's tech environment, right? So it's a big crowd, obviously, and I did have this audience in mind, and therefore I tried providing more of a kind of some technological analysis of things, of certain aspects of cyber dimension, and the way how cyber dimension intersected with nuclear in our war, etc. So in a certain way, it was partly because it's my interest, but I also knew that I'm talking to the audience who is interested in these dimensions. But it was quite actually comforting at the same time for me not to obsess about, like this direct exposure that Instagram or other platforms like Facebook probably give people. So I felt kind of secure. Right. So I felt that I am without that interaction. And at that time, I didn't even need that interaction. I needed the response of like 10 people, perhaps. And all these 10 people read my text. And all these 10 people were constantly in touch with me. And that was maximum I could handle. I couldn't even handle the audience at that time. So it wasn't about what, like, as Isa said, so she experienced that exhaustion quite naturally, but I almost knew that I wouldn't be able to even handle that. So I needed that bottleneck, and I needed to send it to a particular direction, and then it would just kind of disseminate from there.
Maybe to add something, what I found like super interesting as well is that somehow we as the viewer, or we as the reader, we also play a kind of role in this whole thing. So addressing people that are not suffering from the war in Ukraine is also something that is like a kind of like a strong thing that needs like this kind of perspective shifts somehow, right? So I'm also referring a little bit to Asia's text where she also like No Milk, No Love, about also like Germany being part of the whole dynamics that we see right now. Also, not only like in the sphere of politics, but also like while writing, actually, to addressing someone who doesn't like isn't in the situation, but sees it like from the outside, and to bring like this information from the inside to the outside to the viewer. Yeah, maybe I have another question also referring to this, Jarema. It's for you actually. We've been speaking today about The Wanderer, like your Nahuman Khimei's last work that you did, and maybe you could say something referring to like the question of the viewer, because I remember we had this conversation about like you when you were like performing the bodies of that Russian soldiers for the video. We spoke about like that it's like a very thin line that you are going there, and that there was like this kind of decision to do the film and to put it like outside and to screen it and to show it, because and to like somehow shift from like what the artist wants to say with this work to like also like to the audience, like to give the responsibility to the audience to react, to think about, to comment, or to make an interpretation of this kind of images that you were like performing there.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I was actually thinking about it, that as for me, during the production and the pre-production of making this work, I thought only of the foreign viewer. I thought that I cannot produce art that should explain or like, I don't know, conceptualize or criticize something inside for Ukrainians. For me, it was like impossible and not relevant at all, because art during the first months of war was like something that's not actually relatable to the situation, and there was something out from the context. There was no need of producing art about the situation for the people of Ukraine. So while we were preparing this film, this artwork, we were basically referring straightforwardly to the foreign viewer. And we wasn't even realizing that this film might be seen by some Ukrainians, which was actually like a bit stupid. Of course, I mean, that's apparently it is now shown at the art center in Ukraine, Kiev, and it was shown in some other 2 places in Ukraine as well. And it was not that bad as I expected, because the work itself is about me and Roman lying on the ground on the beautiful landscapes of Carpathian Mountains, and we are basically copying the poses of the corpse of the bodies of dead Russian soldiers. And so in this sense, this is like some kind of gesture that might seem to be like some kind of occult, but only when you refer to when people say don't show it on yourself, don't show it some kind of like these things on yourself, when somebody says like, I don't know, with the head off, and then don't show it on yourself. This is the same thing when you like trying to mock the pose of the corpse, but in this sense, we made it on purpose. We decided to deliver it to the, let's say, I don't know, viewer not from Ukraine, who is not in the subject, that it's a different thing to speak about the offender, and we decided, we tried to get rid of this romanticization, somehow the romanticization of a dead body as itself, like dead body without his press story, without the story that he end up lying there. And for us, we say that this is basically the most important part of this piece of flesh on the ground, and it's important to know how he end up here. And for us, it doesn't matter. We don't deliver any sort of like this romanticization inside of it. And this is a gesture that we don't want to romanticize. We don't want to speak about the death in this like global sense. We just want to speak about the particular situation, what is happening now. And in this case, one of the titles that we were thinking about was who is depicted here. And we decided to leave it because of the reasons that it may sound a bit problematic for Ukrainians, because somebody can perceive it as that we are like it's a relativization between like Ukrainians or Russian soldiers, and that's why we left it behind this title. But the idea was that to deliver this responsibility to the viewer, this responsibility that he have to answer this question, who is depicted here, and what he will answer. That means that what kind of position he has toward the war, toward this horrors. And if the answer will be like it's a dead body and it's horrible per se, that means that this answer doesn't work. This answer doesn't deliver you anything important, anything related to the situation. This is just like dreamlike observation. But when you understand that this is an offender, this is an enemy, and if you consider that Russian soldier as an enemy, then your relationship to this image become different. And we wanted to basically force a viewer to make a choice, to decide what do he see, and yes. So and I think, yeah, just to say from what I was starting from, that I think for now what artists are, or writers as well are should produce, that should be produced for mostly, in my opinion, to the people that are out of the context, they are not from Ukraine, that they don't somehow missed Ukraine from the story of Europe, and missed Ukraine from somehow like it was out of the history classes, out of any other classes. And for now it's important to bring it back, or to bring it to Ukraine to be seen, and to make other people be witnesses as well, even through the phones and I don't know, pictures.
Can I add some of the comments, and then maybe we can also wrap up the conversation in this way? I just wanted to also address Yarema's work, because again, like I knew nothing about the context of its production. I only watched it, and of course, as an art historian, I had my my own way of reading it, which I think, and the way I read it, I find this an amazing work actually, and so for the viewer who doesn't know, so it's a short video that is called The Wanderer, and it's an immediate kind of reference to Caspar David Friedrich, and we, or many of us, know this iconic picture of the man that is standing above the sea of fog, like a picture of man versus nature. And this is a very kind of iconic romantic or like important painting for the Romanticism. But what we see in Yarema's work is that, so we see this amazing landscape, and we see this kind of like mutilated bodies on the ground, but I mean, they're not dead. because they're talking, and what they're talking is also interesting. So they're kind of like almost blend with the landscape. They have like they're similarly dressed as the landscape, so they're almost blending. But what they are saying, and we can hear it as viewers, is that they give directions towards shooting. They say 1, 2, 3, start. So they kind of like they are directing a movie, but the scene is still, nothing is happening, and they're just on the ground. And for me, this was interesting in two ways, and I think this links back to the whole conversation about the visual language, the witnessing, the reportage, the documentation. So one thing is important, that it kind of like the way the image is structured with the landscape and the body that is flat on the ground. It's kind of an antithesis towards this visual language of kind of the romantic idea of man that is conquering the land. So it's almost kind of the anti-romanticization of this relationship between the body and the landscape, because these bodies are just flat and they're there. There's nothing heroic about that. And even if we don't know whether it's Russian bodies, Ukrainian bodies, but there is nothing heroic in that kind of like, there is no such a thing as kind of like leveling the body above the nature and whatever. But the other thing that is important is that they give these instructions towards directing, like shoot, camera, work, but nothing is happening. And this in a way links back to our conversation about how do we document a war, because if you go there, as Yerema mentioned before, you go somewhere like to the village that was liberated or never occupied or whatever, like you go to shoot the war, but the sound or like the explosion, it happens like 5 seconds, but the rest of the time you're dealing with this like very kind of suspended, stretch in time nothingness. And oftentimes it's completely unspectacular. There is nothing to it, and there is nothing romantic, bombastic, heroic to it. And of course, we have already kind of the legacy, as a Western civilization, whatever, but we have the legacy of, national romanticism and this kind of battle scenes and this legacy of representing the war. But now we are in the 21st century, and we don't have to repeat those tropes, how we represent the war or how we translate what we witness in terms of images, for example, or words or whatever. So it's a question to us, how do we kind of actually kind of get rid of those bombastic narratives of conquering or like something else. And I guess in this sense, this work of Yerema, where we see a landscape and just like bodies are there and we might not even know the context. And it's kind of like action, but action is not happening. So it's kind of this anti-language or blank space, or like the kind of the possibility to get rid of those like heroic portrayals of whatever, and to reconsider the visual language itself. So I guess that's my final comments.
No, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, that's pretty accurate from my point of view, because I still don't know how, like, there are different way of reading it, and still for me as well. So I'm also like in the search a bit, but just a like super short comment that at the end that it's like this ecology that you mentioned. It's also in a sense about ecology, because there was like one interesting case at the very first weeks of occupation of Ukraine, where the woman in occupied zone, I guess it was in the south, she said that she wants to put seeds in the pockets of the invaders, for though when they will die, there will be flowers growing on that places. So I think this is quite important thing to understand how the peace can be achieved in this time when the word peace already speculated that much that you cannot distinguish it from propaganda. And in this sense, when she putting it, that means that she don't want to put it into the guns inside, into this like gun holes, you know, or whatever. She said that it should come after. In this sense, we also we said that, yeah, this is a calm and peaceful nature was someone who doesn't belong here will dissolve in a few days, and maybe some flowers will grow. Yeah, just a different perspective. Thanks.
So are there any questions? You want to come here?
Hello, and thank you so much for your talk. My name is Nelly, and I have a question to you, Svitlana. You were saying that you felt this loss in your expertise. And you also said that it was some kind of a gift, or that you wanted to dwell on that. And can you elaborate on it? Why is this loss a gift?
Yeah, I think it is very important because one of the things that we really, as humans, do not handle well when we do not know. And today, when there are so many platforms and methods and data sciences and etc., right? So when we live in the age where science and there are so many means of producing knowledge, living without knowing or without understanding, it seems to me, became even more unbearable. But then I still think that it's quite an important experience to know how to live without knowing, how to live in a chaotic situation, and how to balance upon this chaos. And that's what something I think I discovered there, because certain knowledge or certain ways of producing knowledge requires a perspective. And then suddenly, for me there, it was very difficult to figure out my perspective. Am I directly in the midst of war or not? On the first day of invasion, it was completely unclear, because at that point we couldn't understand how far and how fast the invasion would unfold, right? So we were all preparing to disaster scenarios, some people hearing explosions, and in my town, we were just thinking how, and we will just defend ourselves, etc., right? So there was not knowing. Then some kind of ways of knowing or sensing the reality started shaping. We realized that the invasion probably wouldn't go further than this point or that point, or it would just kind of would be reoriented, etc., etc. But there were many different regimes of kind of understanding and not understanding the situation. But that's what precisely I think it's an important to still kind of not to fall apart as a subject in the moment of not knowing, and how you brace yourself, how you talk to other people, and how you not fall into conspiracy theories, which is a very kind of easy recipe at that moment. And we were totally bombarded by all options to kind of, connect all dots. And that's what I think we can resist in any way. So that experience is important for me, because it's not only important in that situation, I think it's important anywhere. War just makes it kind of really radical, right? It radicalizes that experience. But if you are out of that dangerous scenario and somewhere else in life, we can appear in less dangerous, in less radical experience, where not knowing is actually an interesting practice and resistance to producing simple understandings. So that's what I think suddenly I learned in the midst of that war.
Thank you.
Other questions? It was kind of a lot of information. Oops, how can I go back? Here. No one?
Maybe it gives a strange impression that there is no question. I think everybody's very quiet here. and everybody was very concentrated. And I think it was very moving and very, enlightening at the same time to hear you all talk about being a subject and being a scholar, and talking, within those two separate identities as academic, scholars, as scientists, but also, about your personal experience. And I think it was very valuable and very, very intense time for us here. So if there are no questions now, it doesn't mean, that we are not totally engaged.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you for coming.
So yeah, also from our side, thank you for all this information, your thoughts, your energy, and for actually the labor that you're doing. And yeah, it was really good to have you here.
Thank you.
And I hope we will see each other soon in real life.
Thank you, Anya.
Thank you for invitation. It was very interesting.
Thanks. I'll come soon.
Yeah, looking forward to that. So
Yeah.
have a good day. Take care and goodbye. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.